The virtual rabbit hole. Just down the hall from Citra's room was a study. Like every other room in the residence, it had windows on multiple sides, and like everything else in Scythe Cury's life, was kept in perfect order. There was a computer interface there, which Citra used for her studies, because, unlike Faraday, Scythe Cury did not shun the digital when it came to learning. As a Scythe's apprentice, Citra had access to databases and information that most people didn't. The backbrain, it was called. All the raw data within the Thunderhead's memory that was not organized for human consumption. Before her apprenticeship, when she did a standard search for things, the Thunderhead would invariably intrude, saying something like, "I see you are searching for a gift. May I ask for whom? Perhaps I can help you find something appropriate." Sometimes she would let the Thunderhead help her, other times she enjoyed searching alone. But since becoming a Scythe's apprentice, the Thunderhead had gone disturbingly mute, as if it were nothing more than its data. "You'll have to get used to that," Scythe Faraday had told her early on. "Scythes can't speak to the Thunderhead, and it will not speak to us. But in time you'll come to appreciate the silence and self-reliance that comes from its absence." Now more than ever, she could have used the Thunderhead's AI guidance as she browsed through its data files, because the worldwide public camera system seemed designed to thwart her efforts. Her attempts to track Scythe Faraday's movements on the day he died were proving harder than she thought. Video records in the backbrain were not organized by camera or even by location. It seemed the Thunderhead linked them by concept. A moment of identical traffic patterns in complete different parts of the world were linked. Footage featuring people with similar strides were linked. One strand of associations led to images of increasingly spectacular sunsets, all caught by street cams. The Thunderhead's digital memory, Citra came to realize, was structured like a biological brain. Every moment of every video record was connected to 100 others of different criteria, which meant that every connection Citra followed led her down a rabbit hole of virtual neurons. It was like trying to read someone's mind by dissecting their cerebral cortex. It was maddening. The Scythedom, she knew, had created its own algorithms for searching the unsearchable contents of the backbrain, but Citra couldn't ask Scythe Cury without making her suspicious. The woman had already proven that she could see through any lie Citra put forth, so best not to be in a position where Citra would have to lie. The search began as a project, but quickly evolved into a challenge and now was an obsession. Citra would secretly spend an hour or two each day trying to find footage of Scythe Faraday's final movements, but to no avail. She wondered if, even in its silence, the Thunderhead was watching what she did. "My, oh my, you've been picking through my brain," it would say if it were allowed with a virtual week. "Naughty, naughty." Then after weeks, Citra had an epiphany. If everything uploaded to the Thunderhead was stored in the backbrain, then not just public records were there, but personal as well. She couldn't access other people's private records, but anything she uploaded would be available to her, which meant she could seed the search with data of her own. "There's no actual law that says I can't visit my family while I'm an apprentice," Citra brought up in the middle of dinner one night with neither warning nor context of conversation. It was her intent to blindside Scythe Cury with it. She could tell it worked because of the length of time it took Scythe Cury to respond. She took 2 whole spoonfuls of soup before saying anything. "It's our standard practice, and a wise one if you ask me. It's cruel. Didn't you already attend a family wedding?" Citra wondered how Scythe Cury knew that, but wasn't about to let herself be derailed. "In a few months I might die. I think I should have the right to see my family a few times before then." Scythe Cury took 2 more spoonfuls of soup before saying, "I'll consider it." In the end, she agreed, as Citra knew she would. After all, Scythe Cury was a fair woman, and Citra had not lied. She did want to see her family, so the Scythe could not read deceit in Citra's face because there was none. But of course, seeing her family wasn't Citra's only reason for going home. Everything on Citra's street looked the same as she and Scythe Cury strode down it, yet everything was different. A faint sense of longing tugged at her, but she couldn't be sure what she longed for. All she knew was that walking down the street suddenly felt like she was walking in some foreign land where the people spoke a language she didn't know. They rode the elevator up to Citra's apartment with a pudgy woman with a pudgier pug who was positively terrified. The woman, not the dog. The dog couldn't care less. Mrs. Yeltner, that was her name. Before Citra left home, Mrs. Yeltner had reset her lipid point to svelte, but apparently the procedure was struggling against a gluttonous appetite because she was bulging in all the wrong places. "Hello, Mrs. Yeltner," Citra said, guilty to be enjoying the woman's thinly veiled terror. Good to see you," she said, clearly not remembering Citra's name. "Wasn't there just a gleaning on your floor earlier this year? I didn't think it was allowed to hit the same building so soon." "It's allowed," Citra said, "but we're not here to glean today. Although," added Scythe Cury, "anything's possible." When the elevator reached her floor, Mrs. Yeltner actually tripped over her dog in a hurry to get out. It was Sunday. Both of Citra's parents and her brother were home waiting. The visit wasn't a surprise, but there was a surprise on her father's face when he opened the door. "Hi, Dad," Citra said. He took her into his arms in a hug that felt warm, but yet obligatory as well. "We've missed you, honey," said her mother, hugging her as well. Ben kept his distance and just stared at the Scythe. "We were expecting Scythe Faraday," her father said to the lavender-clad woman. "Long story," said Citra. "I have a new mentor now." And Ben blurted out, "You're Scythe Curie." "Ben," chided their mother, "don't be rude." "But you are, aren't you? I've seen pictures. You're famous." The Scythe offered a modest grin. "Infamous is more accurate." Mr. Terranova gestured in the living room. "Please come in," but Scythe Curie never crossed the threshold. "I have business elsewhere," she said, "but I'll return for Citra at dusk." She nodded to Citra's parents, winked at Ben, then turned to leave. The moment the door was closed, both her parents seemed to fold just a bit, as if they had been holding their breath. "I can't believe you're being taught by the Scythe Curie, the grandma of death." Grand Dame, not grandma. "I didn't even know she still existed," said Citra's mom. "Don't all Scythes have to glean themselves eventually?" "We don't have to do anything," Citra said, a little surprised at how little her parents really knew about how the Scythedom worked. "Scythes only self-glean if they want to, or if they're murdered," thought Citra. Her room was the way she had left it, just cleaner. "And if you're not ordained, you can come home, and it will be like you never left," her mother said. Citra didn't tell her that either way she would not be coming home. If she achieved Scythehood, she would probably live with other junior Scythes, and if she did not become an ordained Scythe, she would not live at all. Her parents didn't need to know that. "It's your day," her father said. "What would you like to do?" Citra rummaged through her desk drawer until she found her camera. "Let's go for a walk." The small talk was of the microscopic variety, and although it was good to be with her family, never had the barrier between them felt denser. There were so many things she wished she could talk about, but they'd never understand, never be able to relate. She couldn't talk to her mother about the intricacies of killcraft. She couldn't commiserate with her father about that moment when life left a person's eyes. Her brother was the only one she felt remotely comfortable talking to. "I had a dream that you came to school and gleaned all the jerks," he told her. "Really?" Citra said. "What color were my robes?" He hesitated. "Turquoise, I think." "Then that will be the color I choose." Ben beamed. "What will we call you once you're ordained?" her father said, treating it as if it were a certainty. Citra hadn't even considered the question. She never heard a Scythe referred to by anything but their patron historic or your honor. Were family members bound to that as well? She hadn't even chosen her patron yet. She dodged the question by saying, "You're my family. You can call me whatever you like," hoping that was true. They strolled around town, although she didn't tell them. They passed the small home where she had lived with Rowan and Scythe Faraday. They passed the train station nearest their home. And everywhere they went, Citra made a point to take a family picture, each from an angle very close to that of the nearest public camera. The day was emotionally exhausting. Citra wanted to stay longer, and yet a big part of her couldn't wait for Scythe Curie to arrive. She resolved not to feel guilty about that. She'd had more than her fair share of guilt. "Guilt is the idiot's cousin of remorse," Scythe Faraday had been fond of saying. Scythe Curie didn't ask Citra any questions about her visit on the way home, and Citra was content not to share. She did ask the Scythe something, though. "Does anyone ever call you by your name?" "Other Scythes, ones I'm friendly with, call me Marie." "As in Marie Curie?" My patron historic was a great woman. She coined the term radioactivity and was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize, back when such things were awarded." "But what's your real name? The one you were born with?" Scythe Curie took her time in answering. Finally she said, "There's no one in my life who knows me by that name." "What about your family? They must still be around. After all, they have immunity from gleaning as long as you're alive." She sighed. "I haven't been in touch with my family for more than 100 years. Citra wondered if that would happen to her. Do all Scythes lose the ties to everyone they had known, everything they had been before they were chosen? "Susan," Scythe Curie finally said. "When I was a little girl, they called me Susan. Susie, Sue. It's a pleasure to meet you, Susan." Citra found it next to impossible to imagine Scythe Curie as a little girl. When they got home, Citra uploaded her pictures to the Thunderhead without worrying if the Scythe saw, because there was nothing unusual or suspicious about that. Everyone uploaded their photos. It would have been suspicious if she hadn't. Then later that night, when Citra was sure Scythe Curie was asleep, she went to the study, got online, and retrieved the pics, which was easy to do since they were tagged. Then she dove into the backbrain, following all the links the Thunderhead had forged to her images. She was led to other pictures of her family, as well as other families that resembled hers in some way. Expected. But there was also links to videos taken by street cams in the same location. That's just what she was looking for. Once she created her own algorithm to sort out the irrelevant photos from the street cams, she had a full complement of surveillance videos. Of course, she was still left with millions of randomly accessed, unordered files, but at least now they were all street cam records of Scythe Faraday's neighborhood. She uploaded an image of Scythe Faraday to see if she could isolate video in which he appeared, but as she suspected, nothing came back. The Thunderhead's hands-off policy when it came to Scythes meant that Scythe's images were not tagged in any way. Still, she had successfully narrowed the field from billions of records to millions. However, tracking Scythe Faraday's movements on the day he died was like trying to find a needle in a field of haystacks that stretched to the horizon. Even so, she was determined to find what she was looking for, no matter how long it took. Gleanings should be iconic. They should be memorable. They should have the legendary power of the greatest battles of the mortal age, passed down by word of mouth, becoming as immortal as we are. That is, after all, why we Scythes are here, to keep us connected to our past, tethered to mortality. Yes, most of us will live forever, but some of us, thanks to the Scythedom, will not. For those who will be gleaned, do we not, at the very least, owe them a spectacular end? From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Goddard. Chapter 24, An Embarrassment to Who and What We Are. Numb. Rowan could feel himself growing numb, and while it might have been a good thing for his beleaguered sanity, it was not a good thing for his soul. Never lose your humanity, Scythe Faraday had told him, or you'll be nothing more than a killing machine. He had used the word killing rather than gleaning. Rowan hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now he understood. It stopped being gleaning the moment one became desensitized to the act. Yet this great plane of numbness was not the worst place to be. Numbness was a mere purgatory of gray. No, there was a much worse place, darkness masquerading as enlightenment. It was a place of royal blue, studded with diamonds that glistened like stars. No, chided Scythe Goddard as he watched Rowan practice blade craft with a samurai sword on cotton-stuffed dummies. Have you learned nothing? Rowan was exasperated, but he kept it just beneath a simmer, counting to 10 in his head before turning to face the Scythe, who appeared across the expanse of the estate's front lawn, now littered with fluff and cottony remains. What did I do wrong this time, Your Honor? Said Rowan. The phrase Your Honor had become a profanity, and he couldn't help but spit it out like one. I clearly decapitated 5 of them, eviscerated 3, and I severed the aortas of the rest. If any of them had actually been alive, they would be dead now. I did just what you wanted. That's the problem, said the Scythe. It's not what I want, it's what you want. Where is your passion? You attack like a bot. Rowan sighed, sheathing his blade. Now would come a lecture, or more accurately, an oration, because Scythe Goddard loved nothing more than performing to the gallery, even if it was just a gallery of one. Human beings are predatory by nature, he began. That nature may have been bleached out of us by the sanitizing force of civilization, but it can never be taken from us completely. Embrace it, Rowan. Suckle at its transformative breast. You may think gleaning is an acquired taste, but it's not. The thrill of the hunt and the joy of the kill simmers in all of us. Bring it to the surface, and then you'll be the kind of Scythe this world needs. Rowan wanted to despise all of this, but there was something about honing one's skill, no matter the nature of that skill, that was rewarding. What he hated was the fact that he didn't hate it. Servants replaced the dummies with fresh effigies, scarecrows with extremely short lifespans. Then Goddard took the samurai blade from him and handed him a nasty-looking hunting knife instead, for a more intimate delivery of death. It's a bowie knife. The Texan Scythes use it, Goddard told him. Take great satisfaction and pleasure in this, Rowan, said Scythe Goddard, or you'll be nothing more than a killing machine. Each day was the same. A morning run with Scythe Rand, weight training with Scythe Chomsky, and a nutritionally precise breakfast prepared by a master chef. Then would come killcraft administered by Scythe Goddard himself, blades, bows, ballistics, or the use of his own body as a weapon, never poisons unless they were on the tip of weapons. Gleaning is performed, not administered, Scythe Goddard told him. It's a willful action. To slip into passivity and allow a poison to do all the work is an embarrassment to who and what we are. Goddard's pontifications were constant, and although Rowan often disagreed, he didn't argue or voice his dissent. In this way, Goddard's voice began to supplant his own internal moderator. It became the voice of judgment in his own head. Rowan didn't know why this would be so, yet Goddard was now there in his head, passing judgment on everything he did. The afternoons would be filled with mental training with Scythe Volta, memory exercises, and games to increase cognitive acuity. The smallest part of Rowan's day just before dinner was spent in book learning, but Rowan found that the mental training helped him retain the things he learned without the repetition of study. You will know your history, your biochemistry, and your toxins ad nauseum to impress at conclave, Goddard told Rowan with a disgusted wave of his hand. I've always found it pointless, but one must impress the academics in the Scythedom as well as the pragmatists. Is that what you are? Rowan asked. A pragmatist? It was Volta who answered him. Scythe Goddard is a visionary. That puts him on a level above every other scythe in mid-America, maybe even the world. Goddard didn't disagree. And then there were the parties. They came upon the estate like seizures. Everything else stopped. They even took precedence over Rowan's training. He had no idea who organized them or where the revelers came from, but they always came, along with enough food to feed armies and every sort of decadence. Rowan didn't know if it was his imagination, but there seemed to be more scythes and known celebrities frequenting Goddard's parties than he first imagined. In 3 months, the change in Rowan's physique was obvious, and he spent more time than he would want anyone to know studying the change in the tall mirror in his bedroom. There was definition everywhere, his abs, his pecs. Biceps seemed to inflate out of nowhere, and Scythe Rand constantly slapped his glutes, threatening all sorts of lewd liaisons with him once he was of age. He had finally gotten the hang of his journal, writing things that bordered on thoughtful, but it was still a sham. He never wrote what he truly felt, for he knew that his private journal was not private at all, and that Scythe Goddard read every last word, so he wrote only things that Goddard would want to read. Although Rowan did not forget his secret pledge to throw the scythehood to Citra, there were moments when he willfully suppressed it in his mind, allowing himself to imagine what it would be like to be an ordained scythe. Would he be the type of scythe that Scythe Faraday was, or would he accept the teachings of Goddard? As much as Rowan tried to deny it, there was logic in Goddard's approach. After all, what creature in nature despises its own existence and feels shame for its own means of survival? We became unnatural the moment we conquered death, Scythe Faraday would say, but couldn't that be reason to seek whatever nature we could find within ourselves? If we learned to enjoy gleaning, would it be such a tragedy? He kept these thoughts to himself, but Scythe Volta could read, if not the specifics, then the general nature of his thoughts. I know you were first brought on as an apprentice for very different traits than the ones Scythe Goddard admires, Volta told him. He sees compassion and forbearance as weakness, but you have other traits that you are beginning to awaken. You'll be a new order scythe yet. Of all Goddard's junior scythes, Volta was the most admirable and the one Rowan most related to. He imagined they might be friends once they were equals. Do you remember the pain when we beat you down? Volta asked one afternoon at the end of memory training. How could I ever forget? There were 3 reasons for it, Volta told him. The first is to connect you with your ancestors, reliving the pain, the fear of pain, because that's what led to civilization and humanity's advancement beyond its own mortality. The second is a rite of passage, something sorely missing in our passive world. But the third reason may be the most important. Being made to suffer pain frees us to feel the joy of being human. To Rowan it sounded like more empty platitudes, but Volta wasn't like Goddard that way. He didn't usually speak in lofty, meaningless ideas. I felt plenty of joy in my life without having to be beaten to a pulp, Rowan told him. Volta nodded. You felt some, but just a shadow of what it can be. Without the threat of suffering, we can't experience true joy. The best we get is pleasantness. Rowan had no response to that because it struck him as true. He had led a pleasant life. His biggest complaint was being marginalized, but didn't everyone feel marginalized? They lived in a world where nothing anyone ever did mattered. Survival was guaranteed, income was guaranteed, food was plentiful, there was comfort was a given. The Thunderhead saw to everyone's needs. When you need nothing, what else can life be but pleasant? You'll get it eventually, Scythe Volta told him. Now that your pain nine-nights are dialed to 0, it's inevitable. Esme remained a mystery. Sometimes she came down to eat with them, sometimes she didn't. Sometimes Rowan would catch her reading in various places around the mansion, mortal age books made of paper that had apparently been collected by the owner before he surrendered it all to Scythe Goddard. She would always hide from him whatever she was reading, as if she were embarrassed by it. When you become a scythe, are you going to stay? She asked him. Maybe, he told her, and maybe not. Maybe I won't get to be a scythe, so maybe I'll be nowhere. She ignored the last part of his answer. You should stay, she told him. The fact that this 9-year-old girl seemed to have a crush on him was one more complication Rowan didn't need. She seemed to get everything she wanted, so did that mean she got him if she wanted that too? My name's Esmeralda, but everybody calls me Esme, she told them when she followed him into the weight room one morning. Usually he'd be nice to younger kids, but since he was told he had to be nice, he suddenly found he didn't want to be. I know Scythe Goddard told me, you really shouldn't be here. These weights can be dangerous. And you're not supposed to be here without Scythe Chansky to spot you, she pointed out, then sat down on a bench press, showing no signs of leaving. If you like, we could play a game or something when you're done with your training. I really don't play games. Not even cards? Not even cards. It must be boring to be you. Yeah, well, it's not boring anymore. I'll teach you to play cards tomorrow after dinner, she announced, and since Esme got what she wanted, Rowan was there at the appointed time whether he wanted to be there or not. Esme must be kept happy, Scythe reminded him after Rowan's card game with her. Why? Rowan asked. Goddard doesn't seem to care about anyone who doesn't wear Scythe robes, so why does he care about her? Just be decent to her. I'm decent to everyone, Rowan pointed out. In case you haven't noticed, I'm a decent person. Volta laughed. Hold on to that for as long as you can, he said, as if doing so would be a very difficult thing. Then came the day Scythe Goddard threw a new wrinkle into the taut fabric of Rowan's life. It came without warning, as did all things Scythe Goddard threw at him. It was during Killcraft. Today Rowan was working with 2 blades, daggers in each hand. 2 blades were difficult for him. He favored his right and had little dexterity with his left. Scythe Goddard loved to make it difficult for Rowan in these training sessions and always judged him harshly when he didn't see him rise to some imaginary level of perfection. Yet Rowan had been surprising himself. He had been getting better at wielding weaponry and had even drawn forth mild admissions of approval from Goddard. Adequate, Goddard would say, or that wasn't entirely dismal. High praise for the man. And in spite of himself, Rowan felt satisfaction each time Goddard gave him approval. And he had to admit he was beginning to like wielding deadly weapons. It had grown on him like any other sport. Skill for the sake of skill, and then a sense of accomplishment when he did well. On this particular day, things took a severe turn. It was evident from the moment he stepped onto the lawn that something was up because the dummies had not yet been put out. Instead, there were at least a dozen people milling about the lawn. He didn't get it at first. He should have known that something was different because all the junior Scythes were there ready to watch his training. Usually it was just Goddard. What's going on here? Rowan asked. I can't do my training with people in the way. Tell them to clear out. Rand laughed at him. You're charmingly dense, she said. This ought to be fun, said Chomsky, folding his arms, ready to relish what would come. And then Rowan finally understood. On the lawn, the people weren't milling around. They were standing, equally spaced. They were waiting for him. There were to be no more dummies. Now his practice would be the real thing. Killcraft would now truly be Killcraft. No, Rowan said, shaking his head. No, I can't do this. Oh, but you will, Scythe Goddard said calmly. But I'm not ordained yet. I can't glean. You won't be gleaning, Volta said, putting a comforting hand on Rowan's shoulders. There are ambudrones waiting for each of them. As soon as you're done with them, they'll be rushed to the nearest revival center and be as good as new in a day or two. But Rowan found he had no viable argument except to say it isn't right. Listen here, Goddard said, stepping forward. There are 13 people on that lot. Every single one of them is here by choice, and every single one of them is being well paid for the services they provide. They all know why they're here, and they all know what their job is. They are more than happy to do it, and I expect the same from you, so do your job. Rowan pulled out the blades and looked at them. Those blades would not be cutting into cotton today, but into flesh. Hearts and jugulars, Goddard told him. Dispatch your subject with speed. You will be timed. Rowan wanted to protest, to insist that he couldn't do it, but as much as his heart told him he couldn't, his mind told him the truth. Yes, he could. He had been training for precisely this. All he had to do was dial his conscience down to 0. He knew he was capable of that, and it terrified him. You are to take down 12 of them, Goddard told him, and leave the last one alive. Why leave the last one? Because I said so. Come on, we don't have it all day, grumbled Chomsky. Volta threw Chomsky a withering glare, then spoke to Rowan with far more patience. It's just like stepping into a cold pool. The anticipation is much worse than the reality. Take the leap, and I promise all will be well. Rowan couldn't leave. He could drop his blades and go into the house. He could prove himself to be a failure here and now, and perhaps not have to endure any more of this, but Volta believed in him, and so did Goddard. And even if he wouldn't admit it out loud, for why would Goddard set this challenge before him if he didn't believe Rowan could rise to it? Rowan took a deep breath, gripped his blades tightly in both hands, and with a guttural war cry that downed the alarms blaring in his soul, he launched himself forward. There were men and there were women. The subjects represented different ages, ethnic mixes, body types, from muscular to obese to gaunt. He yelled and screamed and grunted with every thrust, slice, and twist. He had trained well. The blades sunk in with perfect precision. Once he began, he found he couldn't stop. Bodies fell, and he was on to the next and the next. And they didn't fight back. They didn't run in fear. They just stood there and took it. They were no more different than dummies. He was covered in blood. It stung his eyes. The smell thickened his nostrils. And finally he came to the last one, a girl his age with a look of resignation bordering on sorrow. He wanted to end that sorrow. He wanted to complete what he had begun, but he overrode the brutal imperative of the hunter in him. He forced himself not to swing his blade. Do it, she whispered. Do it or I won't get paid. But he dropped his blades to the grass. 12 deadish, 1 left alive. He turned to the Scythes, and they all began to applaud. Well done, Scythe Goddard said, more pleased than Rowan had ever seen him. Very well done. Ambu drones began to descend from above, grasping his victims and spiriting them away to the nearest revival center, and Rowan found himself smiling. Something had torn loose inside of him. He didn't know whether it was a good thing or not, and while part of him felt like falling to his knees and hurling up breakfast, another part of him wanted to howl to the moon like a wolf. A year ago, if you told me that I'd know how to wield more than 24 types of blades, that I would become an expert at firearms, and that I would know at least 10 ways to end a life with my bare hands, I would have laughed and suggested that you ought to get your brain chemistry tweaked. Amazing what can happen in just a few short months. Training under Scythe Goddard is different from under Scythe Faraday. It's intense, physical, and I can't deny that I'm getting better at everything I do. If I am a weapon, then I'm being sharpened against a grindstone every day. My second conclave is coming up in a few weeks. The first trial was nothing more than a simple question. I'm told it will be different this next time. There's no telling what the apprentices will be expected to do, but one thing's for sure. There will be a serious consequence for me if I don't perform to Goddard's liking. I have every confidence that I will. From the Journal of Roman Damish, Scythe Apprentice.